Rain drizzled softly against the city's neon skyline, painting streaks of gold and silver across the cracked pavements. People hurried past with umbrellas and designer coats, blind to the shivering girl crouched beneath an abandoned bus stop. Her name was Amara. Her world, once filled with laughter and dreams, had been reduced to a torn blanket, a small paper cup, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would be kinder. She wasn't always invisible. There was a time when her father's laughter filled their little house, when her mother hummed lullabies that smelled of jasmine and home. But tragedy doesn't knock before it enters. It storms in. A fire, a funeral, and the slow unraveling of everything she knew left her alone in a city that didn't care for broken stories. That night, as the rain grew heavier, she wrapped herself tighter in her worn shawl and whispered to herself, "Just one more day. Amara, one more day." She didn't know that her life was about to collide with someone who would change it forever. A black luxury car pulled up across the street, its headlights cutting through the rain. The man who stepped out looked like he had been carved from the very idea of perfection, tall, sharp-jawed, and dressed in a charcoal suit that whispered of wealth and control. His name was Alexander Kane, the kind of man newspapers called the young king of business. Billionaire at 32, ruthless in the boardroom, untouchable in love. He shouldn't have noticed her. People like him never did. But when Amara stumbled to her feet, slipping on the wet pavement, her eyes, bright, defiant even in despair, met his, and something inside him stilled. She quickly looked away, embarrassed, muttering an apology she didn't need to make. But instead of walking past, Alexander found himself frozen. There was something hauntingly familiar about those eyes, something that pulled at a memory he couldn't name. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice deep and unexpectedly gentle. Amara blinked, taken aback. No one had asked her that in months. I'm fine," she lied, brushing the rain from her face. "Please, don't worry about me." But he did. Against all logic, he found himself offering her a ride, a warm meal. Just for the night, he told himself. A small act of kindness. Yet when she hesitated, pride flickering through her expression, he saw more than a homeless girl. He saw someone with fire still burning beneath the ashes. That night, in the back seat of his car, as city lights blurred past, Amara's silence spoke louder than words. She wasn't impressed by his wealth, nor intimidated by his world. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt something foreign: peace. He dropped her at a quiet hotel and paid for a week's stay, insisting it was just help, nothing more. She thanked him softly, her eyes shimmering with something he couldn't name, something purer. But the next morning, he found himself thinking about her again. In the middle of meetings, during his flight to New York, even as models and heiresses vied for his attention, her face lingered. That quiet dignity, that haunting calm. Days later, he returned to the hotel. The manager told him she'd left at dawn, leaving behind only a note on the bedside table. It read, *, "Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists. But people like me don't belong in your world." *. Alexander stared at the note for a long time, and something inside him cracked. He didn't understand why her words mattered so much, but they did. More than the billion-dollar deals, more than his empire. He began searching for her, quietly, obsessively, through shelters, soup kitchens, and street corners. His friends thought he'd gone mad. But every time he looked into a stranger's eyes, hoping to see hers again, his heart ached. And then one cold evening, fate decided to intervene. Alexander's car broke down near the Old District, a forgotten corner of the city most people avoided. As he waited for his driver to fix the engine, a faint melody drifted through the night. It was a voice, soft, aching, and pure, singing by the fire under a bridge. He followed it, and there she was, Amara, sitting with a small group of children, teaching them to sing to keep warm. Her face glowed in the flicker of firelight, her smile gentle, her spirit untamed. She hadn't noticed him yet, but he couldn't move. It was as if the world had gone silent, save for her voice. When she finally turned and saw him standing there, her eyes widened in disbelief. "You again," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "I never stopped looking for you. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Why would you? You have a world waiting for you. A world I'll never fit in. Alexander stepped closer, the firelight dancing in his eyes. Maybe that's the problem. Amara, maybe my world isn't worth much without you in it. Her heart pounded. No one had ever said her name like that, like it was something sacred. But before she could respond, the sound of sirens echoed nearby, scattering the children. The city wasn't kind to those who slept under bridges. Amara's eyes filled with worry as she turned to gather their few belongings. And that's when everything began to unravel. Alexander instinctively stepped forward, his coat brushing against the damp air as Amara rushed to shield the children. They can't take them, she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. They have nowhere else to go. He could see it in her eyes, the panic of someone who had fought too hard for too little. The sirens drew closer, red and blue light flickering across the cracked walls beneath the bridge. Alexander didn't think. He pulled out his phone, called someone, and within seconds his voice turned cold, commanding. Get social services off this route. Now! The tone of power in his words startled Amara. For a man who had looked at her with such tenderness a moment ago, he now spoke like a king issuing orders to save a kingdom. The cars halted before reaching them, lights fading away into the distance. Within minutes, silence returned, broken only by the soft crackle of fire and the children's frightened whispers. Amara looked at him, suspicion flickering through her calm. Who are you, really? He hesitated. For the first time in his life, Alexander didn't want to be recognized for his last name or his empire. Just someone who didn't want to see you disappear, he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes glinting with defiance and something deeper, trust she didn't want to give. Then she sighed, gathering a small boy into her lap. You shouldn't be here, Alexander. This isn't your world. He knelt beside her, his expensive shoes sinking into mud. Maybe it should be. That night, under the bridge, he listened more than he spoke. She told him about the children, orphans, runaways, the forgotten. She found them, fed them, taught them songs so they wouldn't forget hope. They called her Mama Amma. To them, she wasn't homeless. She was home. As she spoke, he felt something unfamiliar, envy. All his life he had built towers of steel and glass. But this woman, with nothing but a song and a fire, had built hearts. When dawn crept over the skyline, he offered to take them somewhere safe, to build something better for them all. But Amara shook her head. You can't save people by putting them in cages of gold. They need dignity, not pity. Her words cut deep. For a man used to buying solutions, he suddenly realized that the real currency she dealt in was compassion, something his billions couldn't touch. Still, he couldn't leave her there, so he began to visit every night. He brought food, blankets, sometimes just silence. They talked beneath the hum of streetlights, about the world, about loss, about what it meant to belong. Slowly, her laughter began to return. His walls began to crumble. But the more time he spent with her, the more dangerous it became. The media had begun to whisper. The mighty Alexander Kane, seen wandering near the slums, seen talking to a mystery woman under a bridge. His board of directors grew restless. His fiancée, beautiful, calculating, the daughter of a senator, called him one evening, voice dripping with suspicion. Alexander, she said sharply, I saw the photos. Tell me it's business. Tell me you haven't lost your mind. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, softly, maybe I finally found it. The line went dead. The next day, Amara noticed something different in his face. Something wounded. You don't belong here any more than I belong there, she said, touching his sleeve gently. He looked up, eyes dark with determination. Then let's build a place where both of us do. For a while, it felt like a dream. He funded small shelters in secret, naming them Haven Projects. But he made it a heart at all, refusing to attach his name. Together, they created a refuge of forgotten, one step at a time. The children adored him, especially the smallest girl, Nia, who insisted he looked like a lost prince. Amara would laugh every time, her laughter soft and unguarded. Those moments were worth more to Alexander than any deal he'd ever closed. Yet the higher the hope climbed, the closer came the fall. One evening, as Amara prepared dinner for the children, two men in black suits arrived under the bridge. They didn't belong there. Too clean, too sharp. One of them handed her an envelope. "Miss Amara," he said, "on behalf of Mr. Kane's corporation, we regret to inform you that this land has been purchased for redevelopment. You'll need to vacate within 72 hours. Her hands trembled. There must be a mistake. Alexander wouldn't. But the men only nodded and walked away, leaving her frozen in disbelief. When Alexander arrived that night, she didn't wait for him to speak. She threw the crumpled letter at his chest, tears glistening in her eyes. "You lied to me." He picked it up, scanning the document, and his face darkened. "Amara, I didn't approve this. I swear." "Your name is on it," she shouted. "You said you cared. You said this mattered." His voice cracked with urgency. "Someone's trying to set me up. You have to believe me." But she turned away, her voice barely a whisper. "You're just like the rest of them. You see something broken and think fixing it means owning it." For the first time, he saw real hatred in her eyes, and it shattered him. Before he could explain, she was gone. He searched for her for days, abandoning meetings, ignoring calls, defying every warning from his company's board. When he finally traced her, she was volunteering at a remote shelter outside the city, tired, quiet, but still strong. She refused to see him. Every night, he sat in his car outside that shelter, watching her from afar. The world called him a fool, but he didn't care. He would rather be a fool in love than a king without purpose. Then one night, as he waited under the flickering street lamp, a van pulled up. 3 men stepped out, local debt collectors who had long preyed on the shelter's funds. Amara came out to confront them, fearless as ever. But things escalated quickly. Voices rose, threats turned violent. Alexander moved before he even thought. He rushed forward, grabbing one of the men just as a knife flashed. The struggle was quick, brutal. Blood splattered against the pavement. The men fled, tires screeching into the night. Amara fell to her knees beside him. "Alexander, you're bleeding." He looked up at her, pale but smiling faintly. "I told you I'd always find you." Her hands pressed against the wound, trembling. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Why would you risk your life for me?" He looked at her as if the answer had always been obvious. "Because somewhere between your songs and your courage, I forgot how to live without you." Sirens echoed again, closer this time. But unlike before, she wasn't afraid. She held him close, whispering his name over and over as the rain began to fall once more, just like the night they first met. When the ambulance arrived, Alexander's world began to blur. The last thing he saw was her face, tear-streaked, radiant in the flashing lights. And for the first time in his life, he felt at peace. But Amara wasn't done fighting. Not for him. Not for the children. Days later, his name was all over the news. The billionaire who vanished after saving a homeless woman. But she knew he was alive. She felt it. Somewhere beyond the noise of the world, he was still out there, searching for her again. It read only 3 words. "Told you so." Her breath caught. She turned around, her heart pounding. She turned slowly, her trembling hands clutching the note as the morning sun spilled across the dusty street. The light caught on his figure first, tall, familiar, and impossibly alive. Alexander Kane stood a few steps away, thinner than before, paler, but with that same unshakable calm in his eyes. For a heartbeat, the world stopped moving. The air thickened between them, heavy with disbelief, with everything left unsaid. Amara took a step forward, but her voice betrayed her. You're alive?" He smiled faintly, his lips curling with the kind of tired joy that only comes after walking through hell and back. "You didn't really think I'd let something as small as death keep me from finding you, did you?" Tears blurred her vision. She ran to him, and when he caught her, it was as if the city around them vanished. All that existed was the warmth of his arms and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palms, a sound she had thought she'd never hear again. He held her as though he was holding life itself, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost reverent. "I woke up in the hospital 3 weeks later. They told me you disappeared before I could see you. I searched Amara through every corner of the city, through every face. But when I saw your name on that shelter's door, I knew. Amara wiped her tears, smiling through them. You shouldn't have come back for me. You've already given enough. He looked at her with a tenderness that melted to the edges of her defenses. You still don't understand, do you? You were never something I gave to. You're the reason I finally learned how to live. She stared at him for a long time, her lips trembling. For so long she had fought the world alone, believing love was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. But in that moment, standing in the golden light of dawn, she understood something deeper. He didn't save her. He found her, and in finding her, he saved himself. The children from the shelter soon came running out, their laughter slicing through the morning calm. "Mama, Amma," they called, tugging at her skirt before noticing the stranger beside her. Nia gasped first. "The lost prince!" she cried, eyes wide with delight. Alexander laughed, a sound that startled even him. "I've missed you, little one." He knelt, shaking hands with every child, promising them that this time he wasn't just visiting. That day marked the beginning of something extraordinary. Together, they built the Haven Foundation, not as a charity, but as a movement. It wasn't about pity, it was about restoration, about giving forgotten souls the tools to rewrite their stories. And unlike most grand gestures, this one didn't have his name on a single plaque. It had hers. Amara became the face of compassion, the symbol of quiet strength. Her story spread across the world. The homeless girl who stole a billionaire's heart. It sounded like a fairy tale, but those who truly knew them understood it was far more real than any fantasy. Alexander withdrew from the glare of fame. He sold his penthouse, traded designer suits for rolled sleeves and mud-stained shoes. When reporters cornered him one day and asked why a man of his power had chosen to live among the people he once ignored, he simply smiled and said, "Because this is where love finally made sense." Their love wasn't the kind that glittered. It was the kind that grew roots, deep and unbreakable. They argued, they laughed, they built, they healed. Some nights, when the city was quiet and the fire crackled beneath the same bridge where they'd first met, they would sit side by side, watching the stars fight through the smog. Amara would rest her head on his shoulder and whisper, "Do you ever miss it? The old world you left behind." He'd pause, looking at her with a soft grin. "I used to think power was about owning everything. But then I met you and I realized real power is being able to give everything up and still have everything that matters." But peace never stays untested. One winter evening, news broke that Alexander's former company, now run by his ruthless ex-fiancée and former partners, had begun exploiting the very neighborhoods the Haven worked to protect. Luxury towers were being built where shelters once stood. Families were being forced out. The world called it progress. Amara called it betrayal. She found him pacing by the window that night, eyes hard, jaw tight. "You can't fight them with anger," she warned softly. "That's the world you left behind." He turned to her, fire in his gaze. "Then tell me how to fight them, Amara, because if they destroy what we built, what you built, it will be as if you never existed to them." She placed a hand over his heart. "You don't fight them with power. You fight them with proof. Let the world see the difference between greed and grace." Her words became a flame that fueled their next move. Instead of suing or threatening, they opened the doors of the Haven to journalists, to senators, to anyone willing to see what true change looked like. The media expected chaos. What they found were children learning, women working, men rebuilding lives. When a little boy named Kofi stood before the cameras and said, "Miss Amara taught me that broken things can still shine," the world fell silent. That single sentence traveled farther than any speech Alexander could have given. Within weeks, public outrage forced the company to back down. The government stepped in. Laws were changed. And for the first time, the name Haven became a symbol not of charity, but of revolution. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, Alexander found Amara sitting by the riverbank. She looked exhausted, but at peace. "You did it," he whispered, sitting beside her. She shook her head with a soft smile. "No, we did. I may have sung the songs, but you built the stage." He reached into his pocket and took out a small velvet box. Amara froze as he opened it, revealing not a diamond, but a simple ring made from a melted-down coin, one that he'd kept from his first business deal years ago. "I could give you the world," he said quietly, "but you'd only remind me it's not mine to give. So, instead, I give you my promise to keep walking beside you through fire, through rain, through everything." Her eyes shimmered as he slid the ring onto her finger. She didn't need words. Her tears said everything. The city skyline glowed behind them, a mosaic of light and shadow, proof that beauty could grow even in broken places. The wind carried faint laughter from the shelters nearby, mingling with the rustle of the trees. Alexander leaned closer, his voice a whisper meant only for her. "You once told me, people, like, you don't belong in my world. But look around, Amara, you became my world." She smiled, her head resting against his shoulder. "And you became my home." Years passed. The world changed. Their story turned into legend. Students studied it. Artists painted it. Lovers whispered it to one another as proof that love could bloom even between two impossible souls. But to them, it was never about fame or legacy. It was about the nights they spent handing out food in the cold, the mornings they woke up to children's laughter, the quiet moments where words weren't needed. On their 10th anniversary, Alexander took her back to that old bridge. The city had rebuilt it, stronger this time, and beneath it, a golden plaque read, "Where the forgotten met the faithful, and both were found." Amara traced the words with her fingers, her eyes glistening. "You still remember everything," she whispered. "I remember the rain," he said softly. "I remember the paper cup. I remember your eyes when you said you didn't belong. And I remember realizing that night that I had never belonged anywhere until I met you." The wind carried the smell of rain again, just like that first night. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly, and she laughed, a sound so gentle it felt like a prayer. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close as the first drops began to fall. "You know," he murmured, "for a girl who once slept beneath a bridge, you've built an empire of hearts." Amara smiled, gazing up at the sky. "And for a man who once owned everything, you finally learned what truly matters." As the rain fell harder, they stood there in silence. Two souls who had walked through fire and came out whole. Around them, the city pulsed with life, the shelters glowed with light, and the echoes of laughter rose like hymns through the streets. For the world, it was the end of the story. But for them, it was simply another beginning, where love, born from ashes and rain, kept teaching the world that the most powerful thing a heart can ever do is choose to see beauty in what everyone else overlooks.